Good afternoon, everybody. Hello? Okay, there we go. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's officially 12:01, so it's the afternoon. So we're going to have Oxford-style debate, kind of like the Soho Forum, but we don't have really cool websites to give your voting, so we're about in a minute. So for this debate, the question is, where am I? All right. The question is, New Hampshire requires permission from D.C. to secede. For the affirmative is Steve Valet. Steve Valet moved to New Hampshire from New York City in December of 2003. He's a software engineer who enjoys hiking, yoga, and traveling to see solar eclipses. He previously served as treasurer of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance and currently serves as treasurer for the Free State Project. He produced a YouTube video called Proclivity for Taxing Income and Secession as a Way to be Free of Federal Income Tax. So, give it up for Steve. And for the negative is Alo Axelman. Alo is the founder and editor-in-chief of LibertyBlock.com and president of the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. He has been speaking and writing about peaceful separation since 2017, and he has written 8 books about liberty and secession. Give it up for Alo. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to ask everyone close their eyes. If you are for the statement, New Hampshire requires permission from D.C. to secede, please raise your hand. Now please lower your hand. Now if you're for the negative, you don't believe New Hampshire requires permission from D.C. to secede, please raise your hand. Please lower them, and you may open your eyes. Alrighty, so the way that we're going to do this, we're going to have Steve Valet go first for the affirmative position. He's going to have about 10 minutes. Then it's going to go to Alo for his negative position. And then we're going to do 10 minutes rebuttal, 10 minutes of rebuttal, Q&A, and then we'll conclude from there.
Point of order. Undecided vote or no? You are undecided.
Well, if no one raises their hand, then I already know that then there's enough people.
Okay.
All right. Take it away, Steve.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming. If the question were morally, do we need permission from D.C., I would be in full agreement with Alu that we do not. We shouldn't need permission. I take the question to mean, as a practical matter, do we need permission from D.C.? And for that, unfortunately, the answer, in my opinion, is yes, and I'm going to explain why. Okay, let's start with legality. And again, what matters for legality is what the courts think, not what a few of us legal minds may think, but what the courts think. And from the court's point of view, there is exactly one Supreme Court case that covered this. Texas v. White, that's it. Texas v. White was shortly after the Civil War, and they ruled there that unilateral secession is illegal. And I won't go through their convoluted arguments, but just simply the fact that they made that ruling, courts today are going to say unilateral secession is illegal. Now, if we were to try to secede without getting permission from D.C., it would end badly. So let's just talk about that. The courts will say you guys are acting illegally. The feds will bring in the military. Now, I'm sure that Alu will say the military is going to be reluctant to fire on fellow citizens. I would argue, actually, the biggest power that the federal government has is not the military. Obviously, is very powerful, but much more important is their control of the media. And Scott Horton made this point very eloquently yesterday, those of you who saw his speech about Waco. The federal government controls the media and can paint them, the folks in Waco, or the folks at the Branch Davidians, to be just monsters who abuse children and are stockpiling guns because they want to start a war, etc., even though probably only little to none of that was actually true, but the government can make it seem that way. Okay, so same thing here. Normally, U.S. soldiers would be reluctant to fire on fellow citizens, but if the federal government can make us appear to be the bad guys, can make it appear that we fired first, etc., just like they did in Waco, then the government or the soldiers will have no qualms about firing. So that's why I think, as a practical matter, we need to negotiate with the federal government. And for those who, I have my manifesto, which you should have a copy of. If you don't have it, there's more copies on the table behind there. But what I'm proposing is a constitutional amendment modeled after the EU's Article 50, which is what was used for Brexit. So I'm proposing that we have this constitutional amendment, and yes, it's going to take a long, hard campaign to get it passed, but I think that's the way to go. I don't want just any secession. I want a secession that leaves us with good relations with the United States. Another factor to consider is we need lots of people on our side, and I think many people, even though they may be with us in spirit and in philosophy, are reluctant to do something that is illegal or is perceived to be illegal. So if we say we're going to go about it with the legal route, with a constitutional amendment, we will have a lot more people willing to join us. That's my view. And I think for now that's all I have to say, so I will cede my time.
Thank you, Steve. 10 minutes for your opening statement, Alu.
Excellent. First and foremost, I have obviously tremendous respect for Stephen. We're both on the board of the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. I read his book. It is fantastic, the Club 75 Alliance Manifesto. It's extremely well thought out, and I love that it's kind of the opposite approach that I take, which is rip off the Band-Aid, quick divorce, and get out of there. This one's a really long, thought out, methodical, very peaceful, non-confrontational process of bilateral or multilateral secession. That being said, I think the two big reasons why I think it's not the best or the only approach, or why I think this approach is better, is, number one, amending the U.S. Constitution has been tried, I wrote it down somewhere, I think a few dozen times or a few hundred times, trying to amend the U.S. Constitution. I think like 700 or 800. 27 amendments have passed and been ratified. None in the last 80 years, I don't think. So it's extremely difficult to pass a U.S. constitutional amendment. For those who are not familiar, the typical way to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution is generally proposed in Congress by a representative or senator, I believe, and it needs 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, I believe, and then it's sent to the state legislatures, and each state legislature, House and Senate, has to ratify it. 3/4, so 38 states would have to ratify it. Do we believe that we have 38 states that would support secession? Do we believe that 2/3 of Congress, or even like 3 congressmen, would ever support secession? Probably not. Now, I hear what Stephen is saying, that we shouldn't. The argument against ripping off a mandate right now, like seceding right now, for instance, if I could amend the bill, let's say the big budget bill in New Hampshire's state government, in the middle of the night, some state reps like Jason can help me amend it, and then it's passed, and then, oh, we tricked you all, we seceded. I agree it's not the best way to go, because we need the culture, because that would be overturned, or it would be a mess, it would be unpopular, it would be bad. We do need the actual support of, roughly 2/3 of the people, which is what it would take for a state constitutional amendment. So we do need the majority of the people, whatever that means, or the people in general, to support independence. So even if I could get secession passed now, there's an argument to be made. I understand the idea of, let's not do it now. Let's wait till we have the real cultural gravitas and the public support for it. I hear that. But to go so far and to be so methodical and slow with it, to say, let's wait until we have 2/3 of the U.S. Senate and 2/3 of the U.S. House being libertarian or voluntarist or pro-secession, I think we'd be waiting for 31 trillion years. Now, Stephen's more patient than me, and he's very patient, and I'm very impatient. I'm impulsive. I have ADHD. So there's that. And he says might take decades. We're looking at 5, 10 decades until we can hopefully move the culture towards more liberty and independence. I don't know. Part of me is thinking that the culture is going towards more authoritarianism and centralization. On the other hand, I think that what DC politicians are doing, and this is kind of the optimist white pill part of it, is even without, because he said, we have to do it legally in the Supreme Court case, Texas v. White and all that, even without that, he said the public wouldn't support independence if they perceive it as illegal, and I would take that point as somewhat valid. But as DC politicians do more and more horrific things, and I have an article on Liberty Blog of over 100, it's like 120 reasons why we should secede. And each of those individual reasons, I think, would be enough to secede. Like the taxes, an average of like 20-30% effective federal tax burden on each of us. That's a lot of money, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year. That we could do a lot. I can help my mother, I can help my baby, I can help my other relatives and community, and I can buy a bigger house. I can do a lot with that money. Just that reason's enough. Just the foreign wars, the perpetual foreign intervention in military in every country in the world, essentially, 180 countries. Just that is a big enough reason to secede. And there are secessionists who just care about the one issue, interventionism and peace, world peace. And that's a big reason for them. That's the biggest reason. That's all they need. So there are so many reasons to secede. So as that happens, as DC politicians give us more reasons, and Biden's giving me more reasons every day. Every day I'm writing articles of more reasons to secede. They want to ban wood stoves, ban this, ban that, ban gas stoves, ban cars, ban everything, ban all guns. So I think the people, the 10, 20, 30% of Americans, depending on the issue, who align with us, who believe in liberty and independence, are more radicalized and more energetic to push for independence. So what I'm saying with that is, even without the Supreme Court case being overruled, that it could happen, even without that, in a more unilateral way. And the court case, Texas v. White, was a Lincoln judge that he appointed, obviously, the Supreme Court right after the Civil War, like 1860, and obviously they wanted to somehow make a law saying secession is illegal. The U.S. Constitution doesn't address it. That's why they had to do it in a court case. So a bunch of Lincoln judges, right after the war, a few years after, everyone saw that Lincoln is willing to excommunicate, deport his political rivals, imprison people, suspend habeas corpus. He told the judges to say secession's illegal. They did it. They didn't want to be killed or deported. So the judges did his bidding and said unilateral secession's legal, and therefore retroactively South Carolina is a criminal state. So I don't give that much weight. It's a very old case. And there are newer cases. How much time? You're good. There are newer cases with even bigger precedent power, like Roe v. Wade and others that have been overturned. The Chevron, EPA, a bunch of other big cases. There are landmark cases that have been overturned. So to say that a landmark case can't be overturned, the evidence would demonstrate that that's not necessarily always the case. I would concede that the propaganda war would be tremendous if we secede unilaterally. We're all well aware. They'll paint us all as insurrectionists, white supremacists, and dangerous terrorists, Branch Davidians, but even worse. I know. 100% they're going to do that, and that might get some military or other feds to be willing to use violence against us. Still, even with that, I think now more than even a year ago, people are so wise to the propaganda, and the public trust in media is, somewhere around 5% between Congress and cockroaches and AIDS, the approval rating of media. So people don't trust media anymore. Even it's mainstream to say media is fake news, we don't trust it. So they could try to paint us as white supremacists, but I think that's not really going to fly. And from what I've heard from people when I ask those in the military and veterans, they say 0% consistently. 0 soldiers would fire upon people in New Hampshire for seceding. A recent Survey USA poll found that a total of 6% of people throughout the states, the 50 states, or the 8 states we polled, 6% of people would support using military force if the state seceded. So there's no appetite for that kind of war. Dropping bombs on a New Hampshire state where we have relatives, cousins, coworkers, and friends in neighboring states, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, it's not going to fly. It can't happen. And I discussed in my books, Blueprint for Liberty and Articles of Secession, in more depth why a war would not happen, and if it happened, the U.S. military actually wouldn't win. And I explained kind of a bit of the war games of that in that book. So I'm happy to take the questions and rebuttal and all that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Alu. Steve, 10 minutes for rebuttal.
Okay, I want to clarify one thing. Alu mentioned waiting for whatever it is, 60% of the Senate to be libertarian, 60% of the Congress to be libertarian. I don't want to wait that long. That really would be trillions of years or whatever. I do want to wait until, or to have a campaign to convince most Americans, not that they should become libertarian, not at all, but there's room for other people. There's room for small government. Basically, our message would be, we know you want big government, and there's nothing wrong with that. You keep your big government, but please let us have our small government, because we're just different from you. That way we can all get along. We can have the small government we want. You can keep the big government you like, and we can all stay friends. So, no, they're not libertarian at all, but they're just willing to accommodate New Hampshire as being separate and libertarian. They may even see it as a good thing that the libertarians will get out of their hair, that they can now proceed to raise taxes or whatever they want, because the people who would have opposed it have moved out. So, and again, I'm fully aware that Congress itself, anyone in the federal government, is not ever going to voluntarily say, okay, let's push for secession, but with pressure from the people, maybe they will. If the people say, hey, come on, they have declared that you don't have the consent of the governed, they want to secede, come on, Washington, why don't you just let them secede? With enough pressure on that, I think maybe they will come around. And again, I'm looking for good relations with the United States, which under Alu's method, I don't know that we might possibly be able to scrape by, but would we still have good relations with them? I don't know. This way, we would have good relations. And I think that's what I'm going for. Actually, there was something else I wanted to say. I think that's it. I think I received my time.
Alrighty, thank you, Steve. Alu, 10 minutes rebuttal.
Yeah, I think this will be short too. I said we'll have to wait a very long time for a majority of Americans and 2/3 of Congress to be libertarian. You're right, that's not necessarily the case, but you're still conceding that we'll have to wait until 2/3 of Congress and a majority of Americans are either pro-independence and or open-minded enough to understand what you said, and I understand. I mean, we all here understand what open-mindedness, tolerance really means, but unfortunately the others, the right and left, don't really practice what they preach of open-mindedness. And what I mean by that is live and let live, letting others, people and groups, letting them live the way they want to, even if we really don't understand it, even if we object to it, even if we think that it violates our norms and violates what we consider human rights. The right would say it might be a critical human right to raise kids to be Christian or whatever. The left might say it's a critical human right to have free healthcare and school and free everything else. And we're saying we're different. We're not just saying we're different. We're saying we want to violate what they consider to be, the most important human rights. So it takes a lot of open-mindedness, and I've only gotten there in the last few years. It takes a lot to be okay mentally with other people and other groups in other states living in a way that is so objectionable to you. And we're all here. We can sleep at night knowing California is a Marxist state. We can live, we don't love it. We'd like to help the people there, but we're not going to liberate them by using violence. Because that's what happens. Countries, militaries, gangs, they want to liberate us. Hell, ISIS and Al-Qaeda want to liberate me from the tyranny of, white American capitalism, Christian. They want to bring me to Islam and teach me about Allah, or whatever it is. They want to liberate me. So there's always good intentions. The road to hell and war and all this civil war dissatisfaction is paved with good intentions, and that's fine. But it takes a lot to be open-minded. But in today's world where we see that people are seemingly getting less open-minded with cancel culture and everything else becoming so rampant, to say that we'll wait and any time in the foreseeable future, even in 1,000 years, the 2/3 of Congress and the majority, 38 state legislatures, and pretty much majority of Americans will be so open-minded that they can live with a state being seceding and being libertarian and like what you write in your book, which I agree with, and I think it's like utopia. But for them to know that New Hampshire is that kind of state that has no government schools and no free health care, no welfare, oh my God, for them to be open-minded enough to even let us do that legally to pass a constitutional amendment is still asking a lot, I think. You mentioned good relations. I would want great relations too. I do think in a divorce, even if at first it's bitter, and again, I do have some bitterness to DC, to be honest, but a divorce, even if it's contentious at first, could have still good relations. I've seen couples that have good relations and bad. Once we leave, we would love to have open trade, and again, we're a libertarian kind of state. We very much want open free trade and open free travel. So I don't think we would restrict that. The U.S. government might. I can't really speak for them. They might be bitter. They might still want free trade because I think deep down those in D.C. understand that free trade is good for everyone. And freedom of movement. They believe in freedom of movement. Everyone in D.C. has been saying increasingly every day for decades they believe in total freedom of movement. They don't believe in borders at all. Here in New Hampshire, us libertarians are pretty pro-free movement too, so I don't think that would be an issue either. So I hope that kind of answers those questions, and looking forward to all the questions from the crowd.
Thank you very much, Alu. All right, so we're going to open up for Q&A from the crowd. You may ask a question of Steve or Alu or for both of them. Just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on people. Yes, sir.
For both of you, what benefits does seceding have for your everyday individual?
Well, you wrote the book on it.
Yeah, okay. So the benefits for us in New Hampshire are freedom from federal income tax. I mean, that's what we're going to push. That's what we're going to harp on. That there are other benefits, but that's going to be when people, just ordinary Americans, ask, why are you seceding? That's going to be our answer. We want to save money. And because that's such a simple thing, everybody can understand the desire to save money. It's going to be on the order of thousands of dollars that we can save through secession by being free of the federal income tax. Okay, and now I'll let Ali answer.
Oh yeah, I've written like 9 books about that too. The benefits, all my books are about the benefits of independence. Presumed Guilty, it's a 70,000 word book all about criminal justice and how we have systemic violations of due process. Almost every single one is either federal, in the federal justice system, and or approved by the federal government via courts and laws and grants and everything, or even sobriety checkpoints done by Lancaster Police Department. Did you guys know every single sobriety checkpoint is funded by the federal DHS, I believe? In all my research, that's what I found, every single one. I don't know if there's a certain state law that can't fund it, but that's all federal funds. So, if we secede, we might have no more sobriety checkpoints. I could live with that. The CBP and ICE checkpoints are obviously all federal. They're federal agencies. So it's things you don't even think about. And every other violation of due process, I could rattle off court cases, Supreme Court case, of due process issues, criminal justice. Like 99% of criminal justice issues that you had with police actually go away. Qualified immunity, all that stuff, it's all federal. It all goes away. So just criminal justice. Just gun laws. In New Hampshire, we have no gun laws. Except you can't carry in court. Other than that, no gun laws. All the gun laws that apply to us, the reason I don't have a suppressor right now on my SIG is federal gun laws. The reason I can't have an SBR, or I have to be careful to have 16 inches of whatever, I don't even know all the laws, but it's all federal. All those issues, actually what got Ruby Ridge and Waco too, I believe, was federal laws, the ATF. So once we secede, we actually have 0 gun laws. You can suppress your M16 full auto all you want. And same with the importation. Those who are cheap shoes like me and like Tula ammo, the steel case, that was the cheapest ammo, they banned it. The federal government banned it because the EPA a few years ago, and then Biden, I think, banned it more and said no more imports. So now I can't get cheap steel cased ammo. I got to pay more for brass. Once we secede, we can say, hey, Russia, ship all that Tula, back it up, drop it all in my backyard, baby, because I'll take it all. So it's things like that and tons of other things. From taxes, regulations. The reason we can't open up a business sometimes is federal regulations. The reason we don't have more nuclear reactors is we have to spend $1 billion on lawyers and 1,000 OSHA compliant people and EPA compliance officers and other types of experts to make sure we're in compliance with the EPA and other stuff and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I think the NRC. You have to get by them, so you got to hire thousands of lawyers for billions of dollars. You got billions of dollars on you? No. once we secede, we can make a few more nuclear power plants. We're already an energy exporter. We have excess energy. We're one of the biggest, especially with nuclear in the Northeast. Imagine if we have one. Imagine if we had 2 or 3 nuclear power plants here. We'd be, tremendously wealthy. We'd be exporting energy to the whole United States because they are still stuck by their EPA killing them. So it's things like this. And again, I wrote an article on libertyblock.com with like 120 reasons why we should secede and the benefits of it. So the benefits are endless. And for some people, like I said, just not having to pay for foreign wars, killing kids in Yemen and all over the world, that's a big enough reason to secede. If you're going to do it, I don't want to pay for it. Because right now, you are paying for the bombs to be dropped in hospitals all over the world, killing kids, and drone strikes that may or may not get the right person. So, I mean, the benefits are endless, truly infinite. So, that's just one more thing to think about.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, does that mean I wouldn't have to pay 25% on tariffs for imports from China?
No, once we secede, I don't think New Hampshire's government. Jason, can you speak for the state house? I don't think we would impose big tariffs.
Yeah, I don't know. This is, yeah, anyway, I want to talk about defending the guards, but okay.
Well, our state guard would not be fighting foreign wars for the DC politicians once we secede, right? So, bam, that was easy.
In the white in the back.
Yeah, so I think the world is decentralizing. There's like 50 some odd states at the end of World War II, and there's like almost 200 now. Is there anything that we can learn from and that you guys have looked at in that history in terms of, are these states asking permission from their central government to break away, or are they just declaring it? Is there anything to learn from that?
Yes, okay, I can speak to that. The 2 cases that I know of where it was done peacefully are Brexit, if you count that. I mean, there are people who say that doesn't really count because Britain was already sort of a country. But the other one is obviously the velvet divorce of Czechoslovakia. In all other cases, I mean, there's Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, where they seceded from Yugoslavia, and it involved a very bloody war, as we know, hundreds of thousands of people killed. So, yeah, what we can learn is, hey, wouldn't it be better to do it peacefully? That's basically the message. If it's going to happen anyway, and we agree it's the right thing to do under these circumstances when a group of people want to secede, why not do it peacefully? So,
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that you mentioned EU's Article 50, so in the whole EU Charter, Europe, which has, again, been sovereign countries, aka states, and they all joined, and it's become more of a union and more of a country. Now they have an EU parliament, and it's, again, becoming a country. And then people say, well, let's get rid of the UK flag and Germany flags. We don't need so many. It's complicated. Let's just have an EU flag, and they have a flag now. So they're becoming more like a country, just like the United States. So I would agree with you that we should consider UK a secession and not a country leaving a union. No, it was a state of the country of Europe. It's becoming a country, and it left. States in the United States were supposed to be a union of states. In fact, in other languages and throughout all of history of humanity, state and country were like totally synonymous, like 100%. For those who know Hebrew, Medinat Israel means the state of Israel. It also means the country of Israel. Plenty of other languages too. State and country literally mean the same exact thing. But in government schools that you pay for, they taught us all that states are just little provinces in the country, and the federal government is God, and they are sovereign and superior, and supremacy clause and all that. So anyway, back to Article 50. They have that in their charter, Article 50, an exit clause, how to do it. We don't have a process. So they invoked Article 50. It's great. It made sense. I'm glad it worked out. I actually bet someone $31 trillion that it would never happen, and I was wrong. So I'm going to need some FRNs to pay him back. I think it was one of my podcast co-hosts. So it's actually happening, although not really happening. I don't know. It's taken 10 years, and it might happen soon. But they're negotiating it. But we don't have that. In the U.S. Constitution, there is no specific mechanism for how to secede. It just doesn't mention it, meaning it's illegal, because if it's not mentioned, it's not illegal, it's de facto legal. But there's no process for it. So I think that's one more reason why we can do it unilaterally. If there was a process in the Constitution, like Article 15 would say this is the process, and I was saying let's violate that process and just secede, then I think you'd have a better argument saying, hey, there's a process, let's do it so we have more legitimacy from the rest of the people. But there is no process in place. So I just wanted to get that out there. Thanks.
In the green shirt.
Yeah, you said that if if the U.S. military did come in, they wouldn't win. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so in the Blueprint for Liberty, my first book, I kind of went through it, and I was very pessimistic. I thought the U.S. military, the most mighty government military in history of existence, all the resources, they spend more than anyone else, bigger, better military than anyone else in the world, they would beat us. But then I thought about it. I'm not in the military, but with the very basics of what I understand militarily from strategy, they would have to send their military. First, they would have to convince the military to comply. Let's imagine all the soldiers follow orders, where they have robots, which they might have robots and drones by then. They would send it in here. What would be their plan? To blow up our state house? That wouldn't do much. Our state reps aren't always there, usually not, and we don't like most of them. Although by the time we secede, we'll have mostly libertarians. But are they going to kill everyone in the state house? To what end? We'll re-elect even more radical libertarians. Are they going to bomb every single house? Someone yesterday said they would carpet bomb us. To what end? That would plummet their popularity so much. Like I said, we all have cousins and friends over the border in Mass and Maine. So if they did that, they would lose so much popularity. The party in power, so in this case the Democrats, would be gone. They'd be extinct like the Whigs in the 1850s. So they would actually be gone, and they don't want that. Also, there might be an insurrection from the DMV area that actually does take over the Capitol violently, if that happened. Again, there's 6%, so there's no appetite for this. They don't want a war. They could send in nuclear bombs to bomb us, and that would kill everyone in New Hampshire and Mass and New York and D.C. and Maryland, but they don't want that because then they would die. They could send men door to door to try to kill 1.4 million peaceful but very armed and somewhat trained people, which again may not actually work out. In Afghanistan, they tried with a few backwards cave dwellers, and it took them 20 years, and they wasted like $5 trillion, and they still couldn't defeat them. And after 20 years, the U.S. military tucked their tail between their legs and left in embarrassing fashion. So the person I know who's the most well-connected in the Department of Defense tells me like every other day whenever I talk to him that I should be afraid of nothing because the federal government is so incompetent they couldn't even find their ass from their head, and like we shouldn't be afraid of them militarily because if they tried to take over New Hampshire, like I think it would fail just from their own incompetence. So that's one more, but I elaborate a lot more in the book. Thank you.
White shirt hat.
Partially answered this already, but what lessons from the U.S. Civil War would you apply to support your positions? Because we already had in our history states saying we're out of here, and it didn't end well.
Okay, well, I'll say the obvious thing here. Yes, they did unilateral secession, and it didn't work out, obviously. So that's I mean, obviously a prime example of why I'm saying let's not do it unilateral. Let's go through the legal process, which in this case is a constitutional amendment. And as much of a long shot as that is, we can feel good that we can basically tell people, hey, we want small government. It's reasonable that we want small government. And look at how hard it is to do it legally. But we're doing it. Aren't we good citizens? We're doing it legally. That's okay. And now I'll
Yeah, I think when people mention the Civil War, which is one of the most common things that I hear, the big thing to remind people is states tried to secede. I'm not going to get into the reasons. Some people say that was a bad reason. This is a good reason. Again, that's all subjective. Slavery is obviously a despicable reason to secede. But when they seceded and they failed, and the federal government, punished them by killing a total of 700,000 people on both sides, the bloodiest war in our history. It was a failure and a tragic, and I wish it didn't happen. But if states or if partner feels like they're abused for a long time and they try to leave and they fail, and they end up worse off for it, they're punished by their spouse even more, beaten by their abuser even more that night after trying to leave them, would you recommend to that person to never try to leave their abuser ever again because they failed once? In how many areas of life do we recommend never trying something because you failed once? Even if you failed a million times. You fall down, you get back up, and you try again. So you failed once, you wouldn't say to stay with your abuser or tell a slave to not try to run away from a slave master. Imagine you were talking to a slave in 1800 who had a very abusive master who whipped him every day, and he tried to escape and was caught and punished. Would you tell him, oh, don't ever escape again? I know it's bad, but just stay with your slave owner forever? Come on, it's ridiculous. We all know it's ridiculous. As far as lessons from the Civil War, I don't know. I mean, it was such a different time, and I think now the propaganda of the federal government's stronger, but also at the same time, decentralized media and communication is better. Like with Signal, Instagram, Snapchat, Telegram, all over the world, we can get messages around the world in seconds. With the Ukraine thing, I was following some Telegram channels. Some of them were incredible with video from Ukraine. Within seconds, millions of people can see exactly what's happening. So if someone says something else, you can see the truth. You can see video. You can get messages out there. So this could help in the propaganda war push back against them with what we've done with Telegram alternatives and Twitter and everything else, and just Signal, Snapchat, radio. So our communications is, I think, even better than the federal government's propaganda, which is pretty good because they own a lot of the mainstream media. So I think that's a big difference, and that can help in the war. So if they do like bomb a place like Concord, our capital, that'll be all around the world, and there will be sanctions from every other country, the United States government. So because of that, they wouldn't do it because they know that info would get around the world in an instant. But also leading up to it, getting people on board for a secession. This helps both of us to switch the culture. When the federal government abuses people, when you see feds, federal agents by Hurricane Katrina, I believe, knocking over, so like 15 men with AR-15s, militaries, National Guard, or whatever, knocking over that woman because she owned a revolver. And after Katrina, they were still evacuating people. She wouldn't give it up. They knocked her to the ground, and she was like 90 years old. Seeing federal agents do that on video with the modern communication they didn't have in 1860, that makes a lot of people a little bit more upset at the federal government. So it's all of these examples that lead up to it that also help us.
We'll do one more question. Representative Jason Gerhardt.
All right, thank you. Just a question for you. Where do you guys see the local power base that you can start a movement from? So say Ethan Allen with the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont that created Vermont. They had the local militia or whatever you want to call it. So do you guys have any sheriffs on board? Do you have any? What's your local power base? Polls are great, but unless you have people that so-called represent the system supporting it, isn't it just all a pipe dream?
Okay, so my vision is to bring lots and lots and lots of libertarians in the Free State Project way by saying, hey, move to New Hampshire and help us push for secession. So I see it as a migration thing. I don't think the support is there now, but it will be by bringing in libertarians from other states.
Yeah, I think in the broad sense we have 5, 10, 20,000 libertarians, depending what you call libertarian. Although I've heard there are no real libertarians besides me. But we have like 30,000 libertarians in New Hampshire already. We're having a lot of babies, and we're having migration of thousands more every year, 1 or 2, 3,000 more. But I think you meant more specific, like we have state reps. We know we have 15, 20, 30, 50 state reps who support independence. I don't know of any sheriffs in the state who support independence. And as far as other officials that are influential, I'm not sure. But I'm not totally sure I understand what you mean by the power base. I mean, we have the core activists, the 50 was hardcore secession activists, and some of us are here. Penguin, Jason, me, Stephen, and a bunch of others. And that's awesome. And that could be the base that we can concentric circles out. But yeah, we can talk afterwards or later for sure about exactly how to establish that base, the core power base.
Thank you all. All right, before we move into closing statements, just going to make a few announcements, remarks. So this debate was put on by the New Hampshire Independence PAC, where I'm the vice chairman. New Hampshire Independence PAC, we're political action committee. We are working to elect more independence-oriented state representatives to our government here in New Hampshire. Through the New Hampshire Independence PAC, we've developed the House Nullification Caucus, whose purpose is to nullify a lot of the awful federal laws. And we have Representative Jason Gerhardt, member of the Nullification Caucus. So please consider donating to the New Hampshire Independence PAC. It's NHIPAC.org/donate. And one of our big projects, besides getting people like Jason Gerhardt reelected, is with the House Nullification Caucus, is the Defend the Guard Act. That's HB 229. It's been retained in committee. And Defend the Guard would, simply put, prevent the state's National Guard from being deployed to overseas combat unless Congress does its job. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the United States Constitution and constitutionally declares war, which we haven't done since World War II. So Defend the Guard, I'm the state director for Defend the Guard here in New Hampshire. We're doing great things with that. We've got the House Freedom Caucus, Nullification Caucus, and across the aisle, we've got the House Progressive Caucus. They're working with us on this project, so it's very bipartisan. We've got a rally on June 26th, 7:30 in the morning at the Loudon Country Club in New Hampshire. It's right before the legislative golf tournament. I guess I'm going to have to speak louder. So the legislative golf tournament, so there's going to be a bunch of state reps there. We're going to rally for Defend the Guard, show our support. And so if you could please consider donate to that cause, because we are doing a lot of great things, organizing these rallies, and holding politicians to the fire and make sure that they do their job before sending Granite Staters in uniform to go do ours. Want to thank the Free State Base Caucus for allowing us to host this debate in this venue here. So please come back tonight. Come back tonight. There's going to be a big party. Go get drinks, make donations, so we can continue hosting debates like this in a beautiful tent site like these ones. And then we're going to go ahead and do closing statements. Steve?
All right. I think I'm just a little bit more optimistic than Alu is. The case we're going to make here is simply consent of the governed. The idea that consent of the governed really means something. It meant something 200 years ago, and it still means something today. We think we can get most people to agree to that. So it's a matter of first, as the gentleman was saying, building up support locally first, and that's going to involve bringing people in, libertarians from all across the country. But once we build up once we reach the point where we are in the majority, and the federal government no longer has the consent of the governed, we will at the very least make history. And please imagine this scenario. Some school teacher, let's call her Mrs. Smith, is teaching, he's saying, hey, boys and girls, what's great about American government is we govern based on the consent of the governed. And now imagine little Johnny in the back row raises his hand and says, but Mrs. Smith, what about New Hampshire? So just think about that. I think that will put a lot of pressure on the government to where they will say, okay, fine, let's let it happen, even though, of course, they don't want to. I think we can make it happen through education. Right?
Closing statements from Olive?
Yeah, I was actually hoping to get a chance to ask Stephen, but I forgot anyway, what exactly consent of the government means. In his book, the book's phenomenal and the video is phenomenal about the Club 75 Alliance, how to secede so that we no longer have to pay an income tax to the federal government. But after reading the book, one of my questions was what exactly consent of the government means, like what percentage. I think throughout the book, I think he explains that one of the things in the process we would do, one of the steps, is to pass a state resolution or law affirming that New Hampshire, the federal government no longer has consent of the governed, of the people of New Hampshire. That means 2/3 or whatever, but we do not consent to being governed, and I love everything about that. But I don't know exactly what that means and how that would be different than now, because right now, and this is very public, the polls of congressional approval ratings, and I just put this in either another article or a book, so I remember just doing all the numbers a few weeks ago. Congress, the president, Congress, the Senate leader, the House leader, the Speaker of the House, their approval ratings right now are like 20-30%. And their disapproval is like 50-60%. So they clearly do not have the consent of the governed. The House and Senate and President do not have the consent of the governed, and the agencies and courts are probably even less supported by the governed. So they don't have it now, but I'm not seeing Congress all resign. Like, Biden didn't resign yet, and Schumer and Pelosi have not resigned. So they don't have consent of the governed now, and if we pass a resolution, they could easily ignore it. I mean, they've ignored state resolutions. They've ignored their own resolutions. Hell, they ignored the Constitution. The ultimate law of the ultimate land, the highest thing in the universe, the U.S. Constitution. Can anyone think of any examples where the federal government violates the Constitution? I don't know. I think I've written some books about it, how they violate those 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 9th, 10th Amendments and other parts of the Constitution. So to say that they'll respect a state resolution or any of this stuff, I think it's a pipe dream. And I think my big overarching point is just that when you're being abused by a partner, and you know, if my wife was beating me every day, and I asked her every day to please stop beating me or negotiate with her or whatever, or threaten to divorce, eventually, after a few days or weeks or months or years, I would give up and divorce. Imagine your partner's beating you every day for like 247 years. This has been going on since 1789, since the moment the Constitution was ratified, which in and of itself was a coup. At what point do you give up and leave unilaterally? Because we've been trying to negotiate in good faith. We've been trying. I've sent letters to ATF. I've done the public comments where they ask about that stuff. I've done that. I've written my congressman. I went down to Pappas's office, our congressman in Manchester. And I spoke to a staff person who was very nice, and I told her what I thought of Pappas's policies and told him to oppose the new taxes. They didn't listen to me. So they don't really care about. They don't care about listening to the people. They don't have our consent. Yes, I know they get enough votes in the binary system. It's terrible. Democracy is like the actual worst way to run a government. So I would just say that when you're being abused by a spouse, you can ask them to stop. But if you want to leave right away, or after asking for every day for 247 years, begging them to stop, you can just leave now unilaterally. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do our closing vote, so please close your eyes. Everybody, please close your eyes. Raise your hand if you believe New Hampshire requires permission from D.C. to secede. Please lower your hands. Now please raise your hand if you disagree that New Hampshire requires permission from D.C. to secede. Please lower your hands. You may open your eyes. So, Steve, you picked up 1 vote. Awesome. And Alu, you picked up 7 votes. So Steve wins from 0 to 1, and Alu went from 13 to 20.
I was going to say democracy sucks.
Percentage-wise, Steve actually won because 1 on 0 is infinite percent.
I have some arguments that I can make against that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for attending this debate, and thank you to our debaters.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. What's up?
What's going on, man?